I'm Mike Marsh, and this is True. Today's article, What's Up with Supper? Supper. We all eat it nearly every day, but have you ever wondered where we get the word? Every schoolchild learns that dinner is derived from dinar, which was the typical cost of an evening meal for one in imperial Rome. This would often involve a brace of pigeons, a spit-roasted piglet, a congius of wine, a filone, a libra of rapini, and a scoop of gelato for dessert. Less emphasis is generally placed on the origin of dinner's now less common synonym, supper. This can perhaps be attributed to the fact that dinner derives ultimately from Latin, which was more stylish among the English upper classes post-Norman invasion, while supper has more modest roots in Middle English. This was a frequent pattern, for example, replacing Ruth with pity, lich with corpse, and leech with prince. When it first entered the language, supper referred not to the dinner, but to the diner. That is, it meant one who sups. Over time, the meaning was widened from a descriptive personal noun to a common noun, much as it has with zipper, hanger, and frankfurter. Supper is still occasionally used with its original meaning, as are zipper and hanger, though these are fairly rare. However, in modern English, you almost never hear someone described as frankfurting, though the meaning should be clear enough. Ultimately, the etymology of sup, and hence supper, traces back to impatient medieval English children. Around mid-afternoon, they would often begin repeatedly asking, "What's upon the table?" much as impatient modern children might ask, "What's for dinner?" Over time, through the process of linguistic laziness so prevalent in youth, this was often shortened to simply, "What's up?" To this, their frustrated and overworked medieval English mothers would reply, "What's up is what's up." If the medieval English mother was particularly overworked, she might expand this to, "What's up is what's up, and do please shut up." This version of the saying is generally attributed by Nigel's St. Goodfinch's On the Origins of Common Idioms, 1473 edition, to Mrs. Enid Throckmwomble of Yaxley, Cambridgeshire, circa 1132. We see an analogous construction in the modern era under similar circumstances with "you get what you get and you don't get upset." Sometimes, if the children were particularly annoying, their mother would add in a threat that if they did not, in fact, shut up, they might find themselves volunteering for the next crusade. Children's crusades were roughly the medieval equivalent of summer camp, and served the purpose of giving parents some relief from their offspring when school was out of session or there was no back-breaking farm work to do. They often had deceptively enticing names, such as the Wilderness Adventure Crusade, 1257, the Summer Fun Crusade, 1302, and the Forlorn Hope Crusade, 1351. Like summer camps, crusades involved uncomfortable sleeping conditions, forced group activities, poor quality food, and sun exposure. Crusades, however, had the benefit of being largely free of poison ivy and communal showers. Despite this, most medieval English children were eager to avoid being sent off to a crusade, so they tended to shut up about dinner for however long they judged it would take their mother's tempers to cool somewhat. The phrase, "what's up is what's up," eventually transformed, by meta-analysis, into "what's up is wheatsup," or wheatsup in Middle English. This is the same process of linguistic evolution that transformed a napron to an apron, an oot to a newt, and foot's tool to footstool. Wheatsup thus came to refer to the meal, with wheat initially referring to the food as a whole. That is, it was upon what, or wheat, "You were going to sup." This usage appeared around 1179 in Gloucestershire, quickly spread throughout England, and persisted for roughly 130 years. By the early 1300s, wheat came to mean the primary and most consistent element of the meal, rather than the meal as a whole. We see the same sort of thing in the synecdochial replacement of beef as the meat of the animal, not the animal itself, as was the case up until 1938. In turn, this shift in usage led to a number of modern food-related terms. These terms were divided largely along lines of class, as was traditional in medieval England, though happily long since abandoned. Peasants, for instance, would have had a largely grain-based diet if they were lucky, so they came to refer to the grain they ate as their wheat. As most of the populace were, as they are now, peasants, this became the most common usage of wheat, as it still is today. Wealthier households might primarily consume wheat pigeon as their dietary staple. We see this appear in print in the 1313 cookbook, The Proper Preparation of Fine Delicacies for the Aristocratic Table by Glennis Bladderwort, which featured 56 different recipes for wheat pigeon, ranging from wheat pigeon consommé to cooing pudding with cream. The wealthy, often having superior education but inferior jaw mobility, often had difficulty saying wheat pigeon, rendering it closer to woot pigeon. This ultimately gave us the name wood pigeon for the most commonly served species. Many people these days assume that wood pigeon is a reference either to the bird's habitat or the popularity of plank grilling them. This is an understandable mistake, however, and pure coincidence. One characteristic of upper-class supper was that it would, as illustrated by Ms. Bladderwort's book, typically begin with a consommé or broth. This first course of sup was being commonly, if you'll excuse the term, referred to as soup as early as 1683. The lower classes would often seek to emulate the aristocracy, so soup gained great popularity as part of their supper as well, or sometimes the entirety of it aside from some stale bread. The evening meal was often the best of the day because earlier meals were often considerably tougher owing to the cooking techniques of the time. This meant that the soup meal came to indicate higher quality, and higher quality items were referred to as soup-er by comparison. This also gave us the term souped up for something that has been improved. Not everyone could afford the luxury of soup, however. Those on the fringes of society, for instance, would often have to forage for their food, and relied on wild-growing greens for their supper. In order to avoid arrest and harsh punishment for vegetable poaching, they would have to content themselves with otherwise undesirable plants like the dandelion and kale. This made them among the comparatively few English people at the time who regularly consumed vegetables. The landed gentry would mockingly refer to these greens as scoundrels' wheats, and would expend considerable peasant labor on eradicating these plants, which came to be known simply as weeds. In turn, these marginalized folk would often carefully collect the seeds and strew them widely to ensure themselves a source of nourishment, often reserving a few seeds for the flower beds of the aristocracy. While supper itself might have fallen out of common usage in recent decades, it is still the custom in many places to greet friends or acquaintances by saying, "Sup." This cordial invitation to join the greeter for a meal is largely ceremonial, and the greeted is not expected to take the greeter up on the offer. In this case, it is a rhetorical question very similar to, "How are you?" "Can I help you?" or "What's wrong with you?" That is, it is a social grace designed to preserve the illusion that we share some bond of mutual respect and affection, and would not trample one another in an instant for the last box of snack cakes on the shelf at the grocery store. This has been True. Find us online at truecast.com. Our theme song is Bouncy by Sean McMullen from his album Everything. You can find more of his music at sofadogstudio.com.